Good afternoon, my name is Mark Salisbury. I'm going to keep the intros very, very short. Volker, Gustavo, Daniel, Tom, Curtis. This is the Film and TV Nominees Roundtable. Volker, I'm going to start with you. You won the BAFTA, you won the Oscar for All Quiet on the Western Front, which was one of the most remarkable soundtracks of recent times. That do. Embarrass myself. So
nice interpretation.
Thank you. I'm sure you can do much better. So there's a few films you're nominated for, but let's start with All Quiet. So you'd worked with Edward before.
Yes.
So how did you approach this subject matter, and where did that incredible sound come from? And at which stage did you join the project?
Well, I was joining the project very late. It was already. The film was already finished, and I was looking at it on a big cinema screen in Berlin. And on the next, while I was watching it, we had no time to talk much. We just watched it, and then Edward said to me, I want you to destroy the pictures. I would love to have a music for Paul Bäumer's Stomach, and I want you to do something that you have never done before. And then I had to leave. I had to jump on the train. So with these sentences resonating in me, I thought about when I saw the film. In my home village where I grew up, there was a very religious area. So a lot of people were having harmoniums in their houses, specifically old people from that were born around 1900. And I knew a couple of people in my youth that were born even before 1900, so they were singing Bach chorals with a harmonium accompanied, and I knew to sing chorals, harmonizing chorals out of the blue, because we were always practicing all the Bach music. So when I was watching the film, I was thinking about an instrument from that time, and right away these old houses, the inside of the houses, and the smell of people that were bathing in the kitchen, that were cooking there with wood, were just appearing to me. And so I felt it might be nice to have an instrument from that time. So I went back to the studio, and I had this restored harmonium waiting there for a while. I had never found a film for it. And then I started to create this 3-note motive on the day after I've seen it. And as we all know as composers, when you send just one cue to a director, that's not a good thing to do normally. But in this case, I felt like if I don't send him that before I start working, I will be destroyed, because I think that is the core idea. And if he doesn't like it, I have to do a second thing that I don't like. So on the next day, I sent it over to him. Just said, I've done something. Can you check? And then he didn't call me, because he didn't. Oh. And then after the next day after that, he called me and he was cheering into the phone, and he said, "It sounds like Led Zeppelin. I really love it," which meant for me, it's definitely not Led Zeppelin, but what it meant is that it's experimental and it's raw, and it's actually exactly what he was expecting from me, and that is a big relief as a composer when you know the core element is somehow accepted. Then I think you are unleashed a little bit. And we know the other way around, that the first comment is, no, that's not it. And then you're like, you have to go to catharsis, to refresh yourself.
So how long did you have to write the entire score from that point?
6 weeks. Yeah, and I don't know. We talked with many composers, and everybody has an own different approach. I'm a person that loves writing intensely, fast and quick in the beginning, because I want to not lose the momentum in a way. And a lot of times I have already most of all the ideas in place in the first 2 weeks somehow, even though I have maybe a couple of more months. Because a lot of times when you have too much time, it starts getting feathery. You don't know, people are having absurd ideas about how to use music, or and sometimes it needs a little bit time to sit somewhere in the shelf, and then you take it out and then you go back to it. But I'm a big fan of compressed time. Otherwise, I get a little loose, you know.
What about Gustavo and Daniel? Do you like fast and quick?
Yeah, I like fast and quick. I can see the pressure of knowing, that the film is already done and that you have to, do the music and you have 6 weeks. I like and I prefer to work always from the script, before even seeing anything. And the biggest, I always put that example because it's the one that actually all the score was done prior to a frame being shot, which was Brokeback Mountain, and I actually met with Ang, and probably in 4 weeks I sent him all this music, and it was the genius of Ang to say, well, we're going to put this here, we're going to put this here, we're going to repeat, and obviously then adapting it, for the length, but the music was all there. It was funny because I got a phone call from James Seamus, which was the producer, and Ang thought that it was a music that I was sending as an example of stuff that I've done prior, and Ang said, damn it, this was perfect for the movie, and it was, no, this is the music for the movie, and so I like to, but I agree that it's so important to get the gestalt, you know what I mean? The core of what is going to be the sound and the intention of the melodies or of the thing to get that first out of the way and agree with the director, that's the way to go, and then things become much more easier.
What about Daniel? I think last year you said Amsterdam you did really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Almost just wrote it to the picture.
Yeah, I think every movie has a different DNA, and I like working at script stage as well on a movie where you can get really under the bonnet of the film and work alongside the filmmakers all the way through and be in some ways more experimental because you've got more time to fail. And I think time to fail is good because you can try stuff that you don't know is going to work. But then I do also I like a fast turnaround as well sometimes because, again, different personalities with directors, that might be the best way to go. But also the gut response when you see something is always so important. Whenever I finish a script or see a first cut of a film, you always come up with something and you're like, that might be the best stuff you do. And it's really weird because even on Spider-Verse, which is a really interesting one where that was a huge deep dive for years of creating things and coming up with stuff that was really different and building crazy sound worlds, we ended up at the last minute kind of taking one of the very first pieces I'd written, which was a kind of idea to throw in the, this is going to go in the bin, but I'm just trying some ideas out to work out this language. And then we were fiddling around with the beginning and the ending of the film. We still really got it right. And then the music editor, Katie, just pulled out this cue and we just put it. And we're like, fuck, that is really good. And it really worked. And it was just literally one of the first things I'd ever written. And that became the basis of the beginning and the end of the movie. And I think there's a thing when your first experience of a film through a story or a picture is what the audience's experience is because they're seeing something for the first time. And your natural response to that I always listen to that kind of voice.
Curtis, Tom, your song for Mrs. Maisel is fabulous. How did that begin as a piece of work? Did you get the script? Do they talk to you? Just take me through that whole process.
The script comes 2 days before they do the table read. We practically finished writing the songs and recording them by the time they finished the script. It's very strange. TV is obviously, it's similar, but we also have such a short amount of time to write these songs. For many of the songs for Maisel, we would have a little bit more time, and we'd get an assignment, and we'd often write 3 or 4 versions for Amy Sherman-Palladino and Dan Palladino to look at. But with this particular one, for this last season, there were so many songs, it was a condensed musical episode, that we had about 3 weeks from the assignment to when we were recording them. And it was 7 songs with full orchestra, so it was a really epic, so a lot of times we just had to do our first drafts, like you guys were saying, turned out to be what, in almost every case except for one, what we used.
Sorry, 7 songs in 3 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the challenge was, can you write 3 musicals written by 3 different composing teams from the 60s and 50s? So it was each musical was supposed to sound like a different composing group. So we kept trying to come up with, well, maybe this is like a young Kander and Ebb, and this is a Bach and Harnick team, and these are probably just jingle guys that write, that for commercials. They don't actually write this stuff. They're really fun to kind of embody that for this stuff.
The irony is that when we got we knew that we had this month to work. Amy had told us an episode she was going to sort of have all these songs. She brought us into her office, and we didn't know what it was going to be about. And there was a set designed already. There were sketches, and we're like, "You've told everyone else what the songs are about. You didn't tell us. We could have had 2 or 3 more weeks of work here."
And I think she likes the pressure.
Yeah, she likes throwing a curve at us.
Yeah.
So this particular song, how long did it take?
I mean, honestly, we got the assignment. We probably wrote it that weekend and submitted it on the Monday, and they said yes, and then we orchestrated it. That was
Probably because there were so many and they were all based on each other, we had to quickly get each one approved and work through. And also because it was comedy, we had to work with her, Amy wrote the script, to make sure that we were setting up her jokes, she was setting up ours. So it was probably the most intense month I think I've ever experienced. And then we got to be on set and rewrite on set.
It's also interesting when you do, just as, we come from a theater world, that we do a lot of stage musicals, and sort of like you work with a dance arranger, so you're going to write a song. You write when I say song, a lot of times that can just be chords and the melody, right? But in the case of this, we know it has to go so quickly, so we kind of render the whole thing in the box just to be like, this is what it might sound like, right? Okay, here's the intro, whatever. And I wrote a dance break. I wrote a big tap solo, knowing there was a big tap dance with a whole bunch of trash can lids, and so I'm like, I know
Just
this.
like your stuff.
Exactly, very similar to Brokeback Mountain, the tap solo, but so we thought, okay, this is going to be, just quickly, once the dance choreographer comes in, we'll redo it all. No, everything is pretty much exactly what our first demo is what appeared on the screen. There's very little change. The choreographer's like, I love it, this is great. Well, we don't have time, let's just use it. We're like, okay, great.
How much lyrics do you have when you start writing? Is there any?
I mean,
there's nothing from the writer of the script other than she told us it was about personal trash men, that they were private waste management, and we had to explain what that was, and that was it. That was it. We had to go for it from there.
And then when she got the song, she then rewrote the script around what the song said. So she did give us, I think part of it was her having fun with us as the last season, but to literally come in the room and give us the most unrhymable series of words. It's great, it's about trash, and you just have to work in the phrase, private waste management. You're like, oh yeah, it flows right off the tongue, right? It's so lyrical. Yeah, so that was our assignment. But
I think the one thing about not actually having a lot of time is also it means you have less options to deal with lots of notes. Yeah. And I think there's a thing where we've all ended up weirdly in a world as composers where the process of having to redo music is a big part of being a film composer. In some ways it's the sort of suckiest part because you end up writing in a way where you're like, okay, I have to build a system to redo this. Mm-hmm. And once you start taking that out of the system, that's when you get, I think, sort of far more exciting music. Yes. Because you're then relying really just on musical imagination rather than sort of structural management of...
Because in your case, like it used, again, back in the day, they would just hand you the finished cut, nothing's gonna change. Yeah. But nowadays with digital editing, they might change their mind while you're writing, right? And go back and be like, you have this beautiful thing that you're like, but you have to take 1/2 second out here and 3 seconds here, and you're just like, it makes how you guys make that work?
Change it while you're mixing.
While you're mixing, and then you're, so the most, the only thing I can say that's comparable to us is the most complicatedly frustrating part was post, because after they edited, they made a few little changes, and you're in a song, you're in 4/4, you can't just, you know what I mean? There's like, oh, but they did, and we had, they're like, oh, we got to figure out how to make that work, or like, it just is, how can we make this feel natural? Because you would never do that, right? This is not a cut you'd ever make in real life, but for the TV show, that's paramount, so you have to work with it. And in your world, where you're building these fully, beautifully curated builds, you're taking on these melodic journeys, like, it makes my head explode to think how you can work with those tiny edits all the time.
Well, it depends if you push the cue, if you work from the beginning. Mm-hmm. So you push it to the beginning, and then you work. You mostly have in each cue a different spot, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I do both things. I mean, I do songs too, and I write with Bernie Taupin and with Paul Williams and stuff. So I think it's more difficult with the songs than with the score. With the score, you can massage it. You can massage it with the songs. I mean, when they make a kind of, you put one bar, of one beat, it's these ridiculous time changes or things to make
exactly.
it fit.
And people, you feel it. We had to do something with like where they had done this really strange cut where Amy does these huge oneers where she'll film a whole scene where you watch Midge Maisel come in, then cut to the song that's been running, then same cut cuts away from it and follows the actors as they walk away, then turns the camera back on the people singing, but that scene gets edited, so when you turn back on screen, the same song has been running, but it's not in the same place. So we're doing things like doing tiny tempo adjustments in the background, stretching the vocal a little bit, or like adding one extra bar. Suddenly there's a 5-bar phrase, hope you didn't notice. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. It's such a strange thing.
My tip is always stops, like at the end of a beat or something, where it just stops on like the third beat with a bit of silence, and then you can always, if you've got a groove, right. It's a nightmare. Like if you've got a groove when you stop it. So I do a stop, make a little break.
Oh, see, I wish we could have done that.
That's my top tip. Yeah.
We should have done a trick. They should have done a flip. We could have just stopped the music.
And drum fills. Drum fills back in can get you like a beat or like 2 beats. Yeah.
Okay, and then challenge. The other thing that's really hard about Maisel is because there is no score in that television show. It's all source music or original music, like diegetic music. They have the live instruments are probably at least 50% of the time on camera. So you're watching a live band play this music that we've written. So we can't even do that because the drummer, what we see is what you have to hear, right? I mean,
Okay, next series, get pickups. Tell them to do some close-up pickups of just some.
Now we know, right?
Daniel, so Amsterdam, you said before you were like 4th or 5th composer to come
maybe.
in. So when you join a project at that stage, do they tell you what they don't like?
Well, sometimes it's very difficult because I think the process of making films, something like Amsterdam is a really unusual film. So it's not like, hey, we're making a heist movie or we're making a horror movie. We're making a kind of unusual film which has a very unique tone, and it's like, we don't know what this tone is. And I think that was the big problem, was you can go through a project and a director can, tell a composer, it's definitely not this tone. And I've seen this on projects where people say, I don't want this, or I don't like that. And then, a year later, you realize that's exactly what they want. It's like, I bring you some chocolate, don't bring me chocolate. We can't work out what you want to eat. Turns out you actually want chocolate, but you've had to eat all this stuff. And I'm going to get shouted at if I bring you chocolate. This is a weird metaphor, but... and so coming on...
Bring me chocolate.
So coming on late, you sometimes have a thing where there's a freshness. You watch the movie with a set fresh eyes and no prejudice, which I think is the hardest thing, because you can go through exploratory work as a composer and be set in so many different directions that it can become very confusing. And I've been on projects where I'm like, I don't know what we're supposed to be doing anymore, because you've told me, you've banned me from using electric guitars, you've banned this, you've banned that, you don't like this. And then it's like, and then they play something, you're like, that's got electric guitars.
Exactly.
And, and I think with that movie, I deep down thought it was this sort of really beautiful story about friendship and love between these characters. And I had this idea of trying to do it all on woodwinds, because I felt the tone felt right. I could get a sense of like lightness, but also a kind of comedic element and a sort of emotional element. And it felt like they were sort of like slightly outcasts, and I used to joke the woodwinds are like the outcasts of the orchestra, because they never get the respect they deserve. And it was interesting, because if I put more conventional strings on the film, it just didn't gel. Anyway, I went away and just wrote this thing literally after the screening, and they loved it, and so I ended up scoring the movie. But again, it's just that gut reaction of like throwing something at it, and it either works or it doesn't. And if it didn't work, I wouldn't have done the movie, but it worked and they really liked it. So then it was just full steam ahead, dealing with David, who's a lovely guy, but quite complicated.
And do you have those restrictions placed upon you by directors? So you can't use this, you can't use that?
Yeah. I think I would say a big part of making music for a film is psychology, because it's also a question when you complain, at what point, and when you just maybe find a solution for example, I love writing sometimes for films where I feel there's a very unclearness about the direction. I write sometimes 2 cues per, or even 3 per scene, just to give them the chance of a decision. Because when you just send one, a lot of times, I mean, with All Quiet it was different, because I know Edward very well, so there was no boundary where I felt like I'm crossing that. But with people or with directors that I know the first time, sometimes, also what Daniel said, you write sometimes like 40 cues for the scene, but the one they want actually the process of you exploring, but they decide for the first. So everything else feels a little bit like wasted time. But what I have this folder unused cues, which means every 42 cues that you write and that are not going into that film are going into another film. So it's work that is in a way a kind of database for future project. And a lot of times when you're stuck or you have the feeling, what can I do? Then you go into that folder and you feel suddenly I was very inspired, because I had no restrictions. I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and then you take that from that moment, and you maybe transfer that into a, in a new situation.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that is that makes the work as a composer very thankful in a way, because you created a lot of music, but it's triggered by a job.
Correct. Right. It's perfect.
It's so true. That's
perfect description.
I think that we, even as songwriters, we do the same thing. I think it's so hard, kind of what you're both saying, it's so hard to talk about music. Even as musicians, it's hard to talk about music. And then you get people that's not their job. Their job is to create and direct and write. So trying to talk about music, and they say things like, I don't like saxes. And you're like, okay, you're working in the 60s, of course you like saxes, but you're saying something different, you just don't know what you're saying. And I don't know what you're saying, so let's figure it out, right? So likewise, we will, when we have time, which is rarely, but even, except for this last one, we will do the same thing. We'll write, if we are assigned a song, we'll write 3 or 4 or 5. We won't maybe not flesh out the whole thing, but we'll write a verse and a chorus and the groove, just because it's so much easier to talk about, or for someone else to say, I like that song, I like what it's saying, but I kind of like that groove a little bit, and that, great, I'll put those 2 together. As opposed to just, like I said, if you come with just one, even if you know it's the right song or the right music, there's too much, it's 100% what you said. They just need that process to sort of feel, and you're right, nothing ever gets thrown away. You always have those moments,
So do you hate when directors put temp music on picture then?
Not in general. I would say, of course, if it's a Max Richter track, it's always hard to beat that. And it's not about, but it's his music that is so particularly chosen that mostly every film I was trying to deal with a track like that. I said already, please, do you have the money for licensing this? Because I don't want to battle with that. I would say it also depends how deep, of course we know that there's temp love, but at the same time, sometimes the music is just there as a placeholder to make them more comfortable with the cut. And then, it depends a little bit in the conversation if you find out what actually the reason is for the track. If I feel they want to have me copying colleagues, I'm stopping right away, because I think that's, or I call the colleague and I say, listen, there's a piece, could you just listen to that? Do you think that is too close? If I'm very uncertain. But normally I'm not doing that. I think it's, I always consider it as a placeholder, and then I'm trying to come up with something else. Because it comes from the same problem that a lot of, like directors, they are very insecure about talking about music, and I'm seeing my role a little bit to solve that problem, to give them a language, or to actually, ask them what is light for you, or what is dark, what is tension, and then I'm trying to figure out the toolbox for the director. And one part is that I think temp music is not in generally bad.
And I think you said to me once, Daniel, that they'd put temp music and it was your music.
Yeah, that's the worst, because it's like, actually if it's someone else's, you're like, oh, I can take something from this idea, or like this But when it's yours, you're like, okay, that's the best thing I could do with that. Now I have to do like a worse version. So I really try and avoid, like I love shit temp music, where you're like, oh yeah, I can make this film better, this is great. And it's weird, I'm doing a film at the moment where they laid all my stuff over the film. I was like, this is terrible, it really does not help the film. Like you laid it all wrong, it all sounds rubbish, and there's no tension. So luckily we've got rid of it, most of it. But I actually like, bad temp music is good because it inspires you to do better. Really good temp music's a nightmare because it just sticks to the film.
Yeah.
And then you're like, how am I gonna beat that? And I try and like see that coming and throw some things in the mix of mine that stop it. But I don't know, every film is different, and you can always have a cue that's like a pain in the ass. But I've yet to do one where I've done a sort of dirty, you know, like you've done a dirty where you can feel like, I've watched films and I'm like, yeah, I wonder where you got that idea from. I've heard your stuff ripped off on so many things.
I had one that is a particular piece called Iguazu, you know, that I was told by the head of the Composers Society of Los Angeles that it's the most hated piece by composers because it was a moment in particular, a time, you know, where the piece was just everywhere, you know, and it was used for temp. And I even had to fight with Alejandro, with Iñárritu, because the piece was already used by Michael Mann in The Insider, and he wanted to use it again in Babel. And there's one thing about it, and you know this too, when directors are in love with a particular temp thing, it's impossible to change their minds. And it was, you know, my piece and stuff, I said, Alejandro, I mean, I can do something, you know, there was no way, so, you know.
I just had that, I just did a film on Michael Mann, and he's licensed a piece from The Insider, like, that's the score from The Insider, which I find complicated, but it's his film, and, you know, he's always got his vision. And so, you know, he's taken a piece from that film, the Peter Bork and Lisa Gerrard track, and that's in Ferrari as well. So, but he does that quite a lot, Michael. I think everyone.
Well, he tried to do another version in another movie of Iguazu. He did a version of it, but he told me that it didn't work. He preferred it, but he just didn't want to use it a third time, you know. But it was just also in a Madonna, in a Sally Potter movie, and in a Madonna documentary. It was like, you know. But I have mixed feelings with the temp tracks. When they are like the same when they temp with my music, you know. Sometimes I feel that, okay, great, I always try to see, well, what's the feeling about this? I need to do something different, but that conveys this same feeling. And sometimes it's better to have actually a temp track from somebody else, right? But it's the amount of love that you feel the director has with that particular cue. When it's that bond, you know, it's impossible to break it. You know, it's better to say, you know what, just license that piece. Just use that piece. You know.
So what about when you know, with The Last of Us, you'd created the music for the video games, and then they wanted it again in the TV show.
Correct.
You having to.
Yeah. One of the things of the video game that was great was, first of all, that it implied working the way I like to work, because you have to do the music before, you know, like I do with the movies, you know, because it's like 2 or 3 years before you actually see something rendered, right? But also provided something really nice, which is that some of the music that I was giving in every batch, right, during those 2 years, inspired Neil to write new things for the video game. That was really nice. Like, you know, he will said, you know, that piece of music inspired me to write all this different scene that wasn't original in his thing, right? And then when the series came, you know, I always felt that I was writing the music for a story, not really for a video game. I never felt, oh, I'm writing music for a video game, you know? I always felt that I was writing music for the story, and that music was really part of the story. You know, Neil and now Craig Mason too have said that they feel that my music is part of the DNA of the. So it's part like a character. So what will be The Last of Us without Joel or without Ellie? Impossible, right? And same thing with some of these themes. These themes are already part of the story. So we thought it was a good idea to keep the themes, keep the same sonic fabric, the same kind of textures and sounds that we were using in the, you know, and it really worked.
So you're also nominated with David Fleming. So how did you work with him on this?
Well, David really complemented my work not in all the episodes, because he worked in most of them, but not in all of them. But basically, the same thing happened with the game. You know, like the play game music or some of the action stuff. You know. is where David really come in, you know, and use some of my sounds or some of the themes, you know, but develop in another way. And he really did a fantastic job doing that, you know. But that's basically what we did.
So Volker, you also nominated for War Sailor, which
Yeah.
is a Second World War movie, having done a First World War movie. So how did you approach that particular?
Well, that was a complete different film at the same time, which was actually while I was working on All Quiet on the Western Front. You know, the Norwegian director approached me and he was sending me the film, and I was thinking that because the film was in a kind of same mood in a way, but it was completely differently approached because the film is much more a very personal and very fragile story. And also I had the feeling that there were not many cues that I have to write, so it was maybe about 12 or 13. So I had the feeling it was a very nice complementary to All Quiet, because All Quiet was a lot of times very, you know, not violent, but there was quite a kind of distorted sound and massive sound. And every now and then I need distance to my own music. I can't, sometimes it's a little bit like a painter, you know, making a picture, but then you put the picture on the side, and I need a fresh ear on the next day. I can't work constantly on the same cue, but I can't also change into the same, in the same film, into another scene. So I'd rather keep that scene on the side, and I work on something that is detached. And that can be also like a work for a podcast or for a radio station or a dance piece, or so I have always work that is not connected with the film that I'm working on, and that helps me to actually clear my head. And War Sailor was one of those, and I worked there mainly with a cellist. And in my studio, every week there's a violinist and a cellist coming because I can't play it. And so I have them come to me for 3 hours, and we just experiment with, you know, a lot of times what I write is not in the right layer for the violin, because you know, but at the same time, and I studied medicine, so I never studied composition. That means, in a way, I'm approaching a lot of things from a different angle, and sometimes it's the total wrong angle, you know, or people tell me.
Wrong,
you know, right? Yeah, exactly. But there's a Düsseldorf-based art scene that has the sentence "failure as a chance," which is totally true, because when you make mistakes, you can only develop new things. If you always follow the same rules, of course it sounds always great and well done, but there's no way of, you know, shifting. Things, and I think people were always
blessings. Mistakes can be blessings.
Yes,
you know?
absolutely. And so what I do is a lot of times I'm inviting string players to help me a little bit to make it, you know, maybe also for them more comfortable, you know, to play the melodies, or sometimes it's just a matter of in which area the piece is written, the register, and. I worked on War Sailor with a director mainly at the same time. It was even in the same. It was the nomination, or the film that was from the Norwegian film. Was a Norwegian film that was contributed to the Oscars. So I was in a way with 2 foreign films.
So you're always working on lots of different things at the same time. How do you balance that? I mean, do you have a morning doing one thing? I don't know. I mean,
it's like I really like actually just being on one project and being really immersed in that. But it's hard sometimes because you agree to do things 2 years ago and then things get pushed. Like I've agreed to things that come they're like 2024 and 2025, and you're like, I don't want to know what I'm doing then, but apparently I do. And what I find interesting is I call it like the surfing. So you give everything to one thing, and then you're like, okay, I'm kind of done with this. I'm a bit like, I need space from it. And sometimes when you jump onto a different idea, and I always try and make sure I do things that are very different. I try and do it with my projects I choose. I always try and do a different thing to the thing I've done recently. And then it keeps you fresh, and you get excited about something. Yeah. And it's almost like, I don't know, playing the guitar for ages, then you're like, okay, I've done as much as I can, and I've run out of ideas. Jump to the piano for a few days, you know, different thing. And then you're like, you listen to the stuff you've done before and you go, oh, that was good, or like, that was shit. Why did I think that was a good idea? and then you can kind of jump between them. But if you're like, sometimes if you're really just stuck in that one world, you can go a bit crazy, which I have done a bunch of times.
Me too. I mean, it's also, it's not always the same. The recipe is always changing. And I think you have to adjust. I think one of the most important things is to be flexible in a way, and also to to see things on the horizon that appear. And I always say it's a little bit like surfing before the wave. You always have to work in a way that things that might come, you are prepared.
You're ready for it.
You're ready for it, rather than waiting until the last moment and then everything explodes and you have to suddenly write 10 cues in a different direction. So a lot of times I'm trying to have a buffer everywhere, because when the heat starts to rise, there's no time. There's no time for that.
I also look at it like different bands, because I always try and make quite a different sound for each film. So it's almost like a different band. It's like this band is going to play a big stadium. This one's going to play a tiny acoustic set in a pub. And they all require different disciplines. And you might get bored with playing one band for a while and you want to go into the other one. So that's like...
And that's what keeps it fresh, really. The possibility of moving from one thing to another. I find it great, the possibility of not just working on only one thing, because you get stuck. And if you get too obsessive, I mean, it's better to sort of divide your obsession in different things instead of just putting in one thing, because undoubtedly you're going to crash if you just in one thing and you get stuck, which happens.
Yeah.
Then you move to something else, and then you come back and it's fresh, and you pick up something from the other that will bring to this. It's not necessarily that, but something you learn in this other thing that could perhaps serve you for the other, thing that you were stuck with.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be another film that you're doing. It can be also cooking, making a walk, or having other...
Like walking and cooking are the two good ones.
Yes, so you have to do other things that are taking you away from the trenches.
And do you recognise that? I mean,
Absolutely.
He's a walker.
Oh, yeah. He calls me Tom's out on the moors again, just wandering the moors. I think what's interesting for us is because we've worked together for so long is that we have built in, if my obsession is taking over, then you ride it. If I'm stuck, he goes. And that relationship is really lucky that we found it. It has its own, like any long-term partnership, it's complicated.
My husband calls him my first husband.
Yeah. I've known him longer. So it's that relationship that you count on each other to give you those moments when you're stuck. Because when I'm stuck, I know I can always be like, Curtis, help, where are we going?
Ditto, it's great.
But it's great what you mentioned about doing some other things too, because I also have like a small book publishing company, and we have a wine project too, and it's even in disciplines or things that doesn't have anything to do in a way with music, that you can pick up something from doing a book or or making a wine that you can bring to the music.
Oh, totally.
And it's like, okay,
It's also getting in touch with other people. I mean, if you're always surrounded by musicians, you get crazy.
It's very true.
And you have, of course, a lot of tech talk. And do you use this pedal? Which we had.
We've just been talking about.
I love actually the tech talk when it's when you also go to to a museum, or you have contact. For example, I learned, for me, because I always heard you have to work on one film, nothing else. And then I went to a painter that I really like, and he was in Düsseldorf. We have quite a big art scene, and so I went into his atelier, and he had like 3 canvases in the room. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm painting on 3 pictures at the same time. I can't work on this one all the time because it changed. My perspective is changing after an hour or 2 hours. I can't watch it anymore. So I'm going to the next one, just doing something else, and then I can go back to the other, and it changes the perspective." And I thought that was I felt like maybe I don't have to listen to anything that is out there. I just have to work like I want to do it.
The trouble is when you can't do that.
Yes.
Because on Spider-Verse, all I did was live Spider-Verse every hour of my life. Because it was like we had so much to do. I do everything on my own, so I don't have like a team of other people doing anything. I have like one assistant who's amazing and helps me build samples, but I'm like writing everything, and there was a lot of film to write, which was constantly being tweaked, deadline coming. Basically, by the end of that, I was sort of living in LA in a hotel, getting up every morning, going for a run, jumping in the sea. That bit was great. Then I was in an office in Sony till like 1 o'clock in the morning, go back home, go to sleep. And I was just doing that every day. And it's, you know, it wasn't the Hollywood dream, you think. But I'm really pleased with the results, but it's much nicer when you can have a bit of a life around something, and because I think it's way more productive. You like your brain starts to really think about things rather than like just a massive mountain of list of.
It's the stuff that bubbles up when you're not thinking about it. When you walk away, and then it's always 10 minutes later you walk away, and that's what I was trying to get at. You have to let it go.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. We could have carried on, I'm sorry. Please thank Curtis, Tom, Daniel, Gustavo, Volker.